At the beginning of the Book of Mormon, Nephi says he's writing according to the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. People have been debating and disputing what this means since the Book of Mormon came off the press. So today, we're going to take a look at archaeological discoveries made after the Book of Mormon was published to see if they can help us better understand what Nephi meant. First, let's talk about Egyptian language. When most people think of Egyptian, they imagine hieroglyphs, small pictures or images that represented words and sounds in the Egyptian language. But people might be surprised to learn that the Egyptians used several other writing systems as well. One of these other writing systems was known as hieratic. This was a more cursive shorthand script that was originally related to the hieroglyphs but eventually developed its own unique features. But perhaps the most important thing about hieratic for our purposes is that it was also used outside of Egypt. Throughout the 20th century, archaeologists working in Israel and Judah uncovered hundreds of documents that used hieratic Egyptian. In 2008, German archaeologist Stefan Wimmer collected and published over 200 examples of this hieratic writing from 30 different sites throughout Israel. Some are written on what scholars call ostraca, which are just broken pieces of pottery with writing on them. Others are on papyri, seal impressions, and weights used in their monetary system. Most of the time, the hieratic writing is mixed with Hebrew, but there are some cases where the entire document is in hieratic. Many of these come from Nephi's own time, the late 7th and early 6th centuries BC. But some are from several hundred years earlier, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. David Calabro, a scholar of ancient Near Eastern languages, studied these documents very carefully and concluded the Judahite hieratic tradition developed independently from contemporary scribal traditions in Egypt and must have diverged from them at an earlier period. In other words, by Nephi's time, scribes in Judah were writing hieratic differently than scribes in Egypt. Some of the differences specifically reflect the influence of their Hebrew language on their Egyptian writing. Because these writings represent a unique hieratic tradition, scholars have used various terms to distinguish it from the standard hieratic written in Egypt. Wimmer called it Palestinian hieratic, and Calabro called it a Judahite variety of Egyptian script. But Nephi's term works just as well. That is, it's the language of the Egyptians according to the learning of the Jews. Now, we should understand that most of these documents are accounting and administrative documents, so the hieratic signs used in them are mostly numbers, units of measurement, and stuff like that. There's currently no evidence for Israelites producing full literary or historical works like Nephi's books in hieratic. But after Calabro's careful study of some of these hieratic documents, he concluded that the hieratic tradition in Judah lasted in fuller form than only the isolated use of numbers and units of measurement. And it could, at least potentially, have been put to use for purposes other than simple accounting. But whether this potential was actually exploited is unknown in view of the lack of surviving documents. In other words, a book written in the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians was entirely possible in Nephi's day. And in fact, that phrase makes a lot more sense when we understand the archaeological evidence.